think the why for me is exactly that, is that by the system seeing itself, that's how we can change it. If we cannot see what we have, if we can't understand where we are, we can't really change things. I mean, we can change things, but we don't know what we're changing it for. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's the direction. So it's more about having the perspective to understand better, and being able to apply changes that are relevant.
In this episode of Affectively on the How, I talked to Natalia Lombardo. I've long admired her work that she does through the Hum and also through Inspiral. And we specifically talked together about action-oriented research in networks and why that's so important. We do that from a practitioner perspective, so not an academic research one. So why is this research important? And we do our best to make it accessible. I think that if you listen to the episode, you will find loads of tips and tricks about how you can implement this in your network, how you can get started to do research, how to do it, actually, to go through the process of the research. But then most importantly, Natalie reminds us a lot about the implementation of the insights of the research, so that the main thing is that it needs to be useful. Such a great reminder, very simple, but often not that easy to implement. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and then whether get started with your research or keep doing it and add some of the tips and tricks that Nati shares with us. Enjoy the conversation.
So I'm here with Natalia Lombardo for a new episode of Affectively, after a big break of a few months, of the first few months of four first months of my baby's life. So let's see how this one goes and how focused I can be. And thank you, Nati, for jumping in with me on this one. So I'm super, super happy to have Nati, because I have admired her work for a long time, and also the way she does it. And we had a conversation, I remember back in 2019, that kind of like really marked me. And I'm very, very happy to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you here live on the podcast. And I'll give it to you so you can introduce yourself more thoroughly. But for me, I think, or I have, let's say, experienced part of your journey from a distance, thinking that you were one of the, let's say, key persons bringing a lot of things into Inspiral and helping it develop to the network that it became. And then you started with the Hum as well, offering trainings and coachings and like different sorts of things. And I know that you're especially interested in personal development. That's the one call we had back in the day. And also, there was something that sparked my curiosity, and I thought that, I have to have this conversation with Nati, apart from that you've had a lot of experience. So the conversation today is going to be about research in networks and communities. So, why is it relevant to do it, how we could do it, or let's see how we flow, knowing that we have that topic at the center. But the thing I think that sparked me wanting to talk to you was a podcast or sort of like podcasty experiment that you did with Rich, in which you folks talk about as well, like your interest in researching as well, or reading papers, and like being very, let's say, like thorough, and wanting to have like a lot of, well, a bit this feminine thing, wanting to have a lot of security on the things that you bring on and use, and probably too much. And then I thought that I have already back then the feeling of that you are quite in this intersection of practitioner, but also somehow a researcher. And then I thought, okay, then I want to have this conversation with Nati. So thank you for being here and playing with me. And I would give it over to you, so that if you want to introduce yourself a little bit and complement anything that I said.
Great. Thanks, Alícia. Yeah, it's a pleasure to chat with you at any point. So I'm glad that we're talking a little bit about this. Yeah, it's funny how you named this piece about research and this idea of being a researcher, right? Like, I guess that I don't consider myself a researcher, because maybe it's that same thing that you were saying, this feminist thing of being like, oh, I don't know enough. There's always that kind of thing there, because I'm not, I don't have the academic background. But I am a researcher in the sense of wanting to understand how things work, and wanting to have that meta perspective about, especially, in this case of the conversation we're going to have, in the communities that I am, or in the group that I am, how is that things function? How is that we interact with each other? Like, what is that perspective? I like that phrase that I don't remember where it comes from, but it's this idea of the system seeing itself. And it's as being part of those spaces or those communities or those groups, being able to have that meta perspective as well, basically, like the inner outer kind of flow, if it makes sense. I don't think I have much more to say, more than I guess that about myself, right? Apart from being from Spiral and part of the network for a long time, and now on the European node of the network, I'm part of the HAM. So with the HAM, what we do is we work a lot with organizations. So it's not so much on the collectives or the networks, but more on the organizations and how organizations function and how they can work in a more collaborative way. So that's the other hat that I'm bringing today. Yeah, that's probably it for me. Yeah.
Thank you. And so my first question that we could jump on is, why research? And it might seem like a silly question, but also it's like, why? And I'm thinking, is it, does it have to do with the type of persona? Because I think that some people are very interested in wanting to understand the system, and maybe not everyone is. So why do you think it's so relevant to engage with some type of research in networks and communities and these emergent spaces? And then who could do it? What do you think?
Yeah, I like that idea of maybe it's more of a personality type, right? That there's people that have that need, this thing of that I was naming before, of being able to zoom out and see what's going on, so then you can zoom in again and get into the things. I think that as doing research from inside the group is very different as well than doing research as an external researcher, observer, more the anthropological thing, right? I think the why for me is exactly that, is that by the system seeing itself, that's how we can change it. If we cannot see what we have, if we can't understand where we are, we can't really change things. I mean, we can change things, but we don't know what we're changing it for. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's the direction. So it's more about having the perspective to understand better, and being able to apply changes that are relevant, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. And I mean, like traditional organizations also do actually a lot of research if they're big ones. But I think that also, just to add to why it's relevant, is because what we're trying to do is, let's say, well, is this relatively like new old thing, but it's something that there is experience in, but we could learn so much more, or there's so much more to learn and discover. That I think that doing this process and then trying to share in some way what we have learned. And I think that Inspiral has been a great inspiration, or even like I know that in We Share, we took a lot of things, or like Fran brought a lot of things that you had developed in Inspiral, and that this continues on. So I think that also you come from a networking, there was a lot of learning and a lot of inquiry on how can we do this, or what is it, and the system seeing itself. And that then many of us can then apply it in our own networks. And then maybe you learn something from another network and then you adapt it in your own context. But I think that's also for I guess all networks, right? But established networks that maybe have a bit more this possibility of doing that, or maybe some networks that see their role as being this one, and how important that is for the whole ecosystem. Yeah, that would be my reason why I think this is so important. Even research sounds so boring.
Yeah, I like that. I guess that sometimes I forget about how much we document in Spiral and how much we put out there and how much people have picked it up over the years, right? Because there's always like, yeah, in Spiral, I read your handbook, or I know the processes, we'll copy them, or we're modeling this thing over what you do. And I guess that's a big part of who we are. Like the DNA of our network is the experimentation, the rapid prototyping, but also the reflection and observation and understanding that will be the research in this case, and then putting it out there and be like, okay, this is how we're doing things now. I do remember, maybe this is going a little bit on a branch, but as you started to name it, I was like, oh yeah, we used to do that so much. Like maybe back in the days, there wasn't many people, or there wasn't at least not many networks that we knew of from New Zealand, at least. That's at that time I was based there as well, that were trying to do this. So it was a lot of us, we were like a bit geeky about, organizational design, let's try it all. So we were like in constant kind of prototyping, constantly trying to change things and learning about it and putting things. And I think as we matured a little bit more as a network and as practitioners inside it, we slowed down that pace a little bit more. And it became more of like a cadence of once in a while being like, okay, how are things going? Like coming back into what is real right now, because our handbook says one thing and the research says one thing, but also things are constantly changing. And what is actually alive? What is the reality of how we do things right now? And I guess that's another piece of why the research is useful, is to update a little bit of those documentations that we put out there.
Yeah. And I have to say that you make it look so easy in Inspiral, also like the lingo and everything seems so cool, and how difficult it is to distill the things that you have learned and put them in a way that you can apply them and then that others can also apply. So yeah, that's a massive piece of work. And that a lot of us, I think, in the networks have, to thank you in Inspiral for that.
I must say, I'm not one of the biggest documentation in Inspiral. I have to thank the other people that had the capacity to distill everything in clear words and put it out there in a way that is easily accessible. That's why we're a community, right? Like it's multiple people doing multiple pieces.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point on like who could do this or how to do it, because I think there's also like the researcher type often is not the best communication type, so that there is often the need to collaborate and to be able to use the things that have come out, also because at the end, usually like you're so inside in it that sometimes you're not able to express things in a way that others can understand it. So yeah, just maybe a point on the personas or collaboration needed to make research work in networks, especially. And I think that's a good point that you made, is that we got to a cadence in which we were asking, okay, what is real right now? And I think it's such a great question. I've also experienced that in grade 10 that does, just have a look at a handbook. This is how we work. And it's like, well, maybe not anymore. And you have this feeling of dissonance a little bit. But could you tell us, how do you do that? Do you have like on the calendar? Is it a feeling things? How do you get to the point like, okay, now we have to go into the inquiry?
I think specifically in Inspiral, once in a while there will be someone that raises a little flag and it's like, hey folks, this, like what you said, our handbook does not match reality anymore. Like this thing of maybe we don't do that. So should we investigate this? Should we have a bit of a retrospective maybe? Should we do some investigation? Should we change things? Is it the right time? So it's like the sense making through the field of what's happening. A little bit of, I can remember maybe one of the biggest, more recent ones was Haley and some others from the network, Haley Cooper-Ryder, did a little bit of a review of our membership, how our membership works, right? In Inspiral, we used to have collaborators and members, and then the foundation right in the middle in the core. And there was a process by which you changed your status as a member or a collaborator and in and out of the circle and all of that. And at some point, as we kept growing, there was this sense of, well, maybe this member thing doesn't serve us anymore. Potentially outgrew the use of it. So then there was a big process that they started to have conversations with multiple people, sense the system from multiple different pieces, have multiple live conversations with anyone that wanted to join, Lumio discussions about the topic, trying to make some new proposals and new ways of organizing ourselves. And it took multiple months, but the result was all of that time, all of that understanding took us to a new place, right? A new way of organizing ourselves. There's a different membership level. Now everyone is a member. We don't have that core circle anymore. And then that kind of prompted another, later on down the track, maybe like a couple of years later, but I think it was like one thing initiated the other, of thinking about, well, now a lot of us are in multiple parts of the world. So what does being different nodes look like, right? So there's always like, there's a bit of a question there's a bit of a prompt, there's someone that is seeing something and he wants to like check with others, and that starts the process. I will say that it had kind of been like way, yeah.
Yeah, it gets me to ask about the timing, because sometimes like some people might feel it or do the sense making, or oh, it would be time, but sometimes some things are not ripe in my experience. So yeah, I was wondering if you have any experience or reflection with that is like, oh, you know, try to do something, but it's like, okay, maybe not the moment. And then the same thing or similar thing a bit later, and then you know, like there's a spark and then it works and it's like, okay. And then you get to this, because I also find, and then maybe that's a question for later, like how you translate what you have found out into something that is applicable in that moment, that you say, we don't have the core circle and members anymore, but everyone is a member.
Yeah. So I think that an example related to what I was sharing before, this idea of notes, right? It was, I think it was JV, right? Joshua Bio, that maybe like more than 5 years ago, he started to said something around notes. And there was a bit of a conversation kind of came up, some people engaged, and then it kind of was dropped. Right. And that's that feeling of we're not ready yet. We're not there yet. If there's not enough spark, as you named it, I think that's when it feels like it's just not ready. When there's more people that start engaging and start being like, oh yeah, I've seen the same, and I also want to contribute and I want to participate in these conversations. It feels like, there's more energy for it. Then that feels like it's the right time, is when it actually keeps moving. And I think that's just one example, right? That now it got picked up again after the whole change of the membership. And now it was the right time. And I think there's lots of those around the network. And I think like maybe what I want to name is that sometimes some of the people that bring that, they're seeing that and they're like, there's something here is not quite right. And I wonder if we should have a bit of a, conversations around it. Do we need to do something? Do we need to understand it better? And when that doesn't get picked up, it could feel kind of frustrating, right? And that people might do a bunch of work, but there's no energy. There's not enough energy in the network to pick it up. And therefore that work kind of gets dropped. And they feel like, I've done a lot. My contribution is not welcomed. So I think it's like speaking to people, maybe those of us that might be seeing things and want to do something about it. If we started and there's not enough energy, maybe it's more about sensing when is the right time for me to put all that effort, right? Or something around that. I don't know. I saw your face being like, like, this, you've seen it. Yeah. And I think the thing is, can you find enough people? Maybe you should be started that way, right? Like, can you find enough people before you get into doing it? Can you find enough people that see the same issue or that see the same need for a review or a research? And is there enough people that are interested that can put their energy into it? And then you start creating a critical mass. And if there's not a critical mass, maybe you're going to have to drop it, or you can do it, but knowing that it might not be what there's energy for at the time.
Yeah. So that's an important point relevant for networks. Watch out.
Pitfalls.
Yes. And then I was wondering, so you have talked about, let's say we have talked about the discernment and we have talked about this sense making, like, are we there yet or not? And then you go to the prototyping or not. Do you have like any like examples that you might want to, or any one little story that you might want to share about, okay, this is how we did it, like a set of conversations, this is how we did it, and how it led you through. So maybe a bit of the process followed.
Yeah. So I think that the one that I was naming about the change of membership, it's a little bit more in my mind. I can't remember the exact step. It was already a couple of years ago, but it was basically that. I think it was a bunch of people coming together, naming what they were seeing, naming what were some of the issues that were going on, and setting up multiple conversations, right, with different people. So first, I think it was more like open to anyone that wanted to join. Let's have a chat about it. They were set up, they were advertised, anyone could join. And then they might have been one-on-ones with multiple people that maybe had more knowledge of different areas or that had name and specific things that they were interested in. And all of this was hosted by a working group. So it wasn't just one person.
Yeah.
Usually that's the way in Inspiral. There's some sort of working group. Maybe it was even just three or four people, right, to start with. And first it was that sense making. So understanding what's going on, what's happening, what is good, what is not, right? A bit of a retrospective. What is good, what is not so good, what can we do about it? And then once there was enough data in the system, then potentially the same working group or a slightly different one started to put together some sort of proposal for how things could change. And I think they presented 2 or 3 different models. And then based on those different models, there were more conversations and more discussions. So people could prod it and think about it and, adjust it and change it. And after a while, when it seemed like there was one proposal that was more polished and it was the model that seemed more interesting for everyone, then it was like a formal proposal that got put up on Lumio for, a change on our processes. And then after that, of course, and that's more the implementation, right? After sensing, new proposal for changes, designing the changes, new proposal, and then the changes. After that, there was another group that was established to basically put it into practice. So there was a bunch of things that needed to change in terms of, I think, some legal things potentially, but mostly structural.
Do you know if it was the same people that implemented it?
I think potentially there was one person, 1 or 2 people that were the same, and the rest, there were small people that just jumped in to volunteer, right? Everything is volunteer in our network anyway. So, yeah.
Cool. So we have this, let's say, the data gathering part in which you have like group conversations or a workshop or whatever, and then you go like into the one-on-one interviews. That's your data. There are these proposals, and then there's like these other step or where people can chip in as well and inform the process for the final proposal based on those the feedback. And then we go into the creation of a new group and then the implementation into practice.
Yeah. So multiple steps. I think it actually took around a year or so till we actually got there, right?
I think that's even fast, like for like all of this and for doing in networks.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
How about you? Tell me about, because I know you've done this. And we already talked that I was going to ask you about because I'm interested to know. So what was the process that you followed?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's a different perspective. And I think that many networks might also have this when you have, let's say, a researcher who's doing a PhD or a master's and they are interested in your network. And I know in Inspiral, you've had several ones of those. And it's more, I think what you talked about is the first step is that someone is sensing and there's something that needs to change. And what I did is more, I want to let's say what I've done or what I'm doing, I haven't done it completely yet, is a sort of like auto ethnography of like, I'm in this group, I think what we're doing is super interesting and cool, and I think it needs to be shared. So let me have a look at how we're doing this based on, in my case, it's the intersection of self-organizing and emotions. So it was not based on a need, let's say it was my personal need and interest. So for example, it's interesting that the whole, I mean, it could have been different, but the whole part of, I didn't have, let's say, a proposal in which I say, we could do this. It's more, so the process was, let's start from the beginning. That's a good idea, Alícia. Let's do that. So clarifying the topic. And then I think that how we started was with a workshop in person, in which it was basically not talking about emotions, but practicing them, basically. So let's have an experience together about that. It was in one of our gatherings, and then from there a conversation followed how we live them in the day-to-day at greater than, and then I did one-on-one interviews, basically because that's the methodology that is kind of asked for. And I found, and I've mentioned this in I think maybe several of the podcast episodes, but if not in the first one with Elena, that I think that this process of just having a chat with folks one-on-one and having it with everyone is one of, I think, most of the valuable things that I have done, because people were saying so many things that I had not heard in the common spaces and doing with that intentionality, of course. And that's also, I mean, I think you can have just a conversation openly. But of course, if you're very aware of what lens do you bring in, then of course it makes it much more, let's say, focused. And yeah, I was like, it was so cool. Also because I usually, unfortunately, don't take the time from a relational perspective to, just jump in and talk to my colleagues for a whole hour about something that is maybe not, let's say, that common in the spaces, which is, emotions. And of course you get very personal. So that was a great experience. And I think I learned a lot from the system. And then I gave it back to them. So I did the whole, you take a mural board and you start looking for patterns. And it's like, okay, these are the patterns that I see. And then it was getting their feedback or resonance more than feedback. It was like, okay, how does this resonate? This is like what I have seen, but with my own biases, of course. And I think that was that for a little while. And then from there, what I tried to do, and that's the step that I was maybe challenging for me because it didn't come up from a need from the collective, but I said, I want to implement something because it was supposed to be a participatory action research. So it's like there's something that has to come out of it. I think our reflection is also good enough. This is what I have seen, that you go and you can do something about it or not. But then there were like tiny prototypes, things like, for example, there's this book from Brené Brown. Oh, I don't know anymore how it's called. I have that. Yeah, Atlas of the Heart, with the, let's say, emotional experiences. So we started, I think we never finished, but we started a little group of people in which we would, let's say, check an emotion for a week and then reflect on it, how it shows up for us, and just share it on Slack, for example. So this was one thing, some mapping of like emotional experiences that we have, stuff like that. But it was very, like not related to any of our core processes. And so, yeah, that was that for quite a while. And then now I'm currently rewriting the paper with another author. And then he said, well, you need to do the analysis in another way. So I went through the data again. And because it's academic research, well, they ask you to have all the transcripts and then to listen to it and then to code what you're looking for. Or let's say to code, let's say in this case, it's emotions in my case. So I had to code everything that was whether related or implied about emotion. So I have a huge Excel sheet with, okay, every person that I talk to, what are the emotions that come up or are somehow, let's say, I hear them out through my bias. And doing that process was super interesting because once you change the framing a little bit of what you're looking for, you also see new things. And of course, it had been 2 years from the first time that I worked with the data. And of course, I have experienced different things in the collective. So looking at that data again, I was like, oh, I didn't see this back then because, well, I was whether not looking for it or it was just not in my awareness. So doing that process was really great. And then I gave back again to the collective. Okay, so these are the new patterns that have come up that I have seen now in the data. Now we're at this point in which, well, I have all of this sorted out. And also in my case, so that's something that's adding the edit. So how does it look like at the moment? So there are all of these, let's say, families of emotions. So all of these emotions showing up or emotional experiences. And I choose a way of ordering them. And so there's a sort of tree with different sets. I think, for example, one that was quite there was frustration, for example. So we have loads of different emotional experiences around frustration. And then potentially, I guess, we will focus on one of those families of emotions and dive into more detail. So yeah, that's a little bit the process.
I love it. Thank you. Super fascinating. And also it sparked a lot of thoughts for me, right? First of all, I want to see both.
All right. So this is from the post-production. And I said, I really regret I said while I was recording that I was going to share how I'd done it and that there were, I had first done the research process in one way and then in another way, or the sorting out of the notes and doing the whole sense making. And then in another way that had led me to very different results, which it has, but now it's even somewhere else. So, but yeah, maybe just to share, I think, I'm not sure how relevant this is. It depends on your research goal and method. Then of course you have so many different ways of doing this. I had done it in the way that I very often do sense making for workshops, which is, to get all the ideas classified. This was by people, each of them. And then I started clustering according to topics. And from then I drew the main storylines, the main elements that seemed to be interesting as potential narrative lines. So that is what I had at the beginning from my research. And then with Bernhard, I started coding all emotions that were coming up. So there's this huge list with the emotions that for me came up in any of the interviews that I was doing, and then with the quotes. And then with that, we created families of emotions, that you can see here. Yes, and then there was this tree of emotions. So like trying to put like, how to say, classify certain emotions into other ones, just so that you don't have 20, but maybe 5 or so. And then in the end, exactly. So this was then the families of emotions. So from each main family, so was frustration, which had several emotions into it. Then like were all the different excerpts from the interviews that related to it, and then tensions, and then belonging. And then love and care, acceptance, exclusion, personal growth. So, the different ones. And then there was also a document that was capturing all the patterns that I could see. Washing machine, that's a good one. That's one that is still that we're still working on. So the different patterns with the different, whether quotes or explanations of what they mean. So these are the documents that I started, that, let's say, led me to getting to writing. But so from this one that you can see here, the mural, then I got those storylines from this analysis. And then from there, I started building up the story. But then with the 3 other documents that you have seen, there was, in the end, what we started writing with Bernhard was us getting together in person and starting to talk about, okay, what is interesting here? And also doing that with a certain eye on the literature, on what we want to write about. So in the end, all of this didn't lead me directly to almost any, I would say, narrative, except the washing machine, and the doing versus being as well. But I would say not the rest directly. Is more sense making, having a conversation, and now we're working on something else that has taken a life of its own. And it's the end of 25 and it's still not done. But we keep trying, and I'll keep you posted. So this is it. Cut from the post-production.
With the maps that you did, the first one, the new one, right? Like what happens when that idea of what happens when we change the question in a way in the same data, right? Like the information is right there. It's just what we're looking at that might change. What's the perspective that we bring in, and what's the different perspectives that we can gather if we reframe what we're looking for. And that's super interesting. I also want to see what happened with those tiny prototypes. Like what can we do, and what new data can you gather after prototyping and testing things? Because then you'll have more information to work with. So that's always super interesting for me. One thing that got sparked was thinking about something that I did a while back. So, the idea of pods. So the tiny crews, we call them pods. So around 3 to 5 or 6 people, and we come together to help each other or support each other or think about something or do a course together, whatever it is. And this is many years ago, before we actually had it in Inspiral. I had that thought. I think I was reading that there's this article called The Elephants. It's very old, and it's about a group of people that have been supporting each other on their personal development over the years, right? And they gather together like once in a while, and they go through processes together. And I was like, wow, that sounds fascinating. I wonder if in Inspiral, instead of having a one-on-one as we used to have our stewardship system, if we have pods, what would it look like to have support pods instead? So I was sensing that there was some challenges with the stewardship system, and something came to me to try something different. So I came from the place of not let's investigate what's happening, but from the place of experimentation. So it was kind of on the other way around. And I proposed a little prototype. So I said, I'm going to start doing this. I think this is interesting. Who might want to do it? And there was John as well that jumped in at the time. He was a catalyst. He was like, that sounds really interesting. And kind of I've been doing it as well with this few of the people here. So why don't we set it up as, can we experiment with this and see what we learn about it? So we set up a first few pods. We ran a few different processes. And after a while, we kind of reflected back the data, right? Like it was like, okay, let's reflect on it. How is it working? We shared it back with the network and we said, who wants to be a part of the second prototype? So we kind of kept expanding it and changing it. We formed a working group to support the pods that we're forming. Once in a while, we'll do a retrospective. So each pod at the end of a cycle, maybe there was 3 months, maybe it was 6 months, they will do a retrospective where they will reflect. They will share with us what they were learning, that it was working and not with their processes. And we will gather all that information and reflect it back, like share it back with the network as a lesson. It's like, this is what we're learning about this. And eventually over the years of doing that, I think it took us, around 2 years or something like this. And then we set it up as a new process. So it was like through the prototyping, pausing regularly to reflect and learn, reflecting it back to the network, and then changing how we were doing things based on that learning and that lesson. And then eventually coming into, okay, this is now a process. This is now how we take care of each other. We form pods, right? So we changed our processes from that place.
It's such a good point. Because I think that's actually how I have seen the most, let's say, research being done in networks. And that's also research, like start directly with the prototype, like the experimenting part. And it's like, okay, I have seen this, or I have this hunch, let's try it out and then see if there are other people that resonate with that. And then you do, let's say, the experiment, and then you have talked about the second prototype, and then that in the end it becomes a process. So I think that's usually how it's done, but also I think there's an art, and I wanted to ask you, how do you share that learning back? Like you do the first prototype, how do you share the learning? Yeah. How does it, let's say, become a process then?
Yeah, so I think it was very important for us that because we set it as an experiment, we already had a little bit of a vision of maybe there's something here, right? Like there was that hunch of maybe there's something here. So let's test it out, but let's reflect back what we learned. So because of that, we set up this idea of at the end of each pod, they will be a retrospective. Mm-hmm. And we are doing them as cycles, right? All the pods started at the same time. They finish at the same time. They did a retrospective. We collected that information as a working group. We processed it. We saw the patterns. We understood what was coming out. And then we put out like a little tiny report, right? It was mainly like a slide of this is what we're learning. This is what's working. This is what's not so working so well. These are some of the processes that pods are using. And through that is that we came up with all this, like through all of those iterations, rapid prototyping and iteration, right? It's very agile way, is that we came up with, this seems to be the main patterns. This seems to be what works. This seems to be some considerations to pay attention to. And now there's a little bit of a guide about how pods run in Inspiral that is based on that, right? It's based on not trying to design it from the top, but designing it from the prototyping, from the experimentation and the gathering the information at the end. Does it make sense? Maybe I got a little bit lost. You let me know.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I was trying to understand or think about like, what are the conditions? Because I think that's the way you describe it. It's done very thoroughly. And I'm just, trying to think about what is needed to do, let's say, the experiment in this way, in which the reflection part is also in, because sometimes I have a feeling that we say, this is a good thing, and then we say this is an experiment, but then the experiment becomes a process, and then the process doesn't stick, and it's like, okay, and we don't, usually we don't even say that we don't do this anymore. It's like it just dies out, and then it's like, okay, we have all of these like little dead topics floating around us. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that, or like,
yeah, how did it stick? And I think at the moment it comes and goes, and there's different people that are really into it and they keep doing it. And now that we have nodes, it's a little bit different because each node will organize pods in their own way. You kind of start adjusting, but it's still a thing that's stuck, like that we're using. I think it's stuck because people found it useful. It was not just that we did one prototype, like maybe 6 of us tested it out, and then we said, okay, this is how we do things now. It was multiple rounds, multiple people getting engaged, multiple people testing different things, connecting with each other, and finding that what we were using or what they were using was useful for them. So then the more people in the network that engaged and found it useful, then that's how it stick, because it worked, not because we said we should do this. Yeah. Because I've seen that as well, right? There's things that we try and it's like, we do it 3 times and then it's like, okay, we're not doing that anymore. Now there's something else. And I think like also the doing it over a period of time and coming back to it and reflecting and sharing and encouraging people to test it themselves, like having a little bit of a pulse for it. And I think that the fact that we had a working group, that helped as well, because we were kind of holding the baton for it, right? And setting up the rhythm, setting up the cycle, supporting the pods, helping people learn about different practices they can use. So that helped as well.
Yeah, and I think definitely, or at least in my experience, there's this element of it will stick if it works, but at the same time, having this time that you mentioned, it's a framework, or like a time frame of 2 years, and different people trying it out, because sometimes you cannot say I try something and it doesn't work for me. Maybe it doesn't work for me in this moment in my life, but it might at some point. And there's a need for things to be able to stay for a little bit and see the different scenarios or different people. So it's something about let's say these conditions of not throwing it away too quickly as well. So I guess that there's, again, discernment comes in at many points in the process, right? But there is another important one. If it's like, okay, it's not working because it really just doesn't work for us right now. Or it's like, do we need, to have this time and patience to let it simmer a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And it could have been, right? It could have been that we tried it 2 or 3 cycles and it didn't catch up. It was not the right time. And maybe later on in time, it could be like, oh, remember that thing that we tried once? What happens if we try it for this other thing, right? Sometimes I feel like the knowledge stays there and you might use it differently later on. It's a little bit like what you were saying with your research, right? At the beginning, something came up and you saw that and there was some patterns and you use it in a way. Maybe now that you came back to that data, something else is happening and maybe you find a different way to apply it. So, yeah. It could be tricky as well, right? Because I don't know in your networks, but in the communities that I'm a part of, after a while, you're like, we tried that, didn't work. Next thing. But it's like, but maybe there was something out of that is useful. And I think we have come back in Inspiro multiple times to be like, do you remember that thing that we tried? What was it again? And what is that we learned about that one? And can we is it something that is useful? Like what can we keep? It's another question, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to ask about, let's say, the knowledge of that, right? Because as you say, over the years, you try so many things and then, there are many new things, but many are going back to the basics again and again. Do you gather those experiments in any way? Like, is there, or the knowledge just stays with you folks that have been there longest and can bring back that knowledge again and again?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think. I mean, we have tons of documentation, right? We named already, we like documentation. So we do have all that in our tribe and it's there, but it is in the history and it is in the history of the people that have been there the longest to be like, there was someone once that did that thing. Let me find it out. Or do you remember what was that thing? So it's kind of like you need a bit of a history librarian in a way, right? That can remember those things. Is the community memory.
Yeah, I guess maybe this happens automatically, but I think it's interesting also to mention it explicitly. This thing of sensing something to go talk. I guess this happens said, like intuitively you go talk to the co-founder or to the elders of the network, or this sort of thing, also to understand, okay, what's the, what has happened in the past, or what is the context. Not, just, I have this impulse, let's just do it, without also gathering the information of what's happened before as well. That might save a little bit of energy, or understanding what was missing, or what is it that could be different this time.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's where actually good documentation is useful, right? Because at least you can find it. Even if I don't remember the exact details, I can prod around instead of having to have one person that remembers it all, or that has the whole knowledge. It's like, it's a document. It's a document in our drive somewhere that has all of these, retrospectives that we've done over the years on pods. Well, let's gather it around and see what happens when we look at the data around again, and we bring a different question and we apply it in a different context or for a different solution, right? Like what happens with that?
Yeah, and I think so, because you asked me about my research, I think that the question, I mean, it's not super alive right now because I'm reworking the data, but there's something, talking to you, I'm like, there's something that needs to get out of it in a practical way, but maybe it's not possible. Like, I don't know. So I'm thinking about the implementation part of it, which is more, let's say, obvious when you start with an experiment directly. You have like a clear vision of how you want it to become, and then you inform it through the different experiments. But when you start with even like this part of the membership, right? I think that's really tricky, how you do the translation from data into something that can be useful. And of course, you can always take the route and say, like just by sharing it and helping people reflect, that's already useful, and you don't know where this information will flow. But at the same time, I'm thinking like, doing this research is so much work. There's something more obvious or more specific that has to come out of it. But I don't know if there's anything else that you would find useful to share about how from data you come back into a translation of a process, a practice. So.
Yeah, I think there's the two steps, right? The step is the system seeing itself, and then is what do you do with that seeing, right? And I think it needs to come from the system as well. It's like, okay, this is what we're seeing. This is what's happening. What do we do with that? Is it okay? Is it no? Is it something that we want to change? Is there something that we want to do with this information that we gather, right? Is there a new process? Is there something that we want to test out? Is it useful for something? So probably my perspective is put it back into the system and see what the system wants to do with it. And maybe it's a conversation, and maybe it's like, hey guys, this is what my research find out. What do you think it means for us? And is there something that anyone is interested in trying and testing? Is there anyone that wants to experiment with something? And then you see what happens from there, right? Is the collective intelligence, that's where it supposedly kicks in.
Yeah, it's also always a good reminder that you come up with it yourself or in the group you offer it and see what happens with.
Yeah, and it is what we were saying before, right? If there is energy in the system, if something resonates and there's people like, yeah, that makes total sense, and it sparks something in me about what I can do with it. And if there's enough energy, then something will happen.
Think I don't have the researcher profile, or I don't have the power in the system to do this. But if that people feel, this is something I would want to do, then I think that it's super relevant, and that it would be, I think, for this, as you were mentioning, right? We need to understand where we are and where we're heading towards. And often we're also busy that sometimes that this is happening, but no one has the time to do it. Or the people that usually do it, they are in some life circumstance in which is not possible. So I think just to encourage and just to see these examples or these processes we have described so that people, you don't have to do it on your own. If you have the feeling you don't have the power in the system for that, well, you can look for other people or work with their support. So this is something that, I think is relevant, or the people hear research, or it's like, scary, like, or not my thing, and or we don't name it as research. But I think it is when we do these processes or we experiment And then, as my colleague Manel would say, like how important it is to document it properly so it can be found and used.
Yeah, I think there's something that what you just said pinged me that is, is actually the importance of having a cadence of reflection as a network. And what does it look like, right? For us in Inspire, we do have a cadence where every few months or so, we have a few days together. So we have our annual retreats and so on, but also sometimes we have like just moments for having conversations on things around the network, right? And there's those moments of, okay, we have 2 days where we're going to have a bunch of different conversations. We'll do a little bit of an open space. What does it feel like we want to be talking about? What are the things that we want to be, in a way, reflecting on or thinking about together or jamming? So even if it's just something as simple as a retrospective that we can do together, and maybe it's asynchronously, whatever it is, but having those times when we stop to reflect and bring some of that back in. It's like, well, what do we do with that reflection then? That's different. That's another story, right? But just pausing once in a while. And I think that a lot of, at least the groups that we work with, more with the hum, that's always the rhythm that is missing. Is the reflection piece is the one that we like, we're too busy. We can't really stop and do this. But that's where the juicy things come through. And that's where you find where the energy is at for the change, because it's normally with the things that people find a little bit frustrating, or like something that here is not working. Can we tweak that? Right. So I think it's more about that thinking, when are the times that you can stop to reflect as a group?
Yeah. And there's something very interesting about that. I think that maybe it gets prevented with the cadence you were talking about, but one of the patterns that came up is the washing machine, as some of my colleagues name it. It's like we're in a freaking washing machine all the time, like busy with ourselves. And then it's like you do something, but then it's like, here it goes again. And you're always in the washing machine, and you don't, and as one said, you don't fix that by talking more about ourselves. So there's something that it's open. Like I don't know yet. That's part of the work in the upcoming months. Maybe we pick that up. But yeah, there was something interesting about this being too busy about ourselves, and what is some people, are more driven to the work, let's say external work with partners, and some people really like to do the internal reflection. But I think there's something about the cadence, or giving that reflection a little bit of, or at least again, just my experience, a bit of a framing and scope, that you put it there. And it's not maybe that you're doing it all the time. I also find that quite exhausting, or it's like at the end, it seems that you're just doing kind of like self-therapy for the organization. And some moments maybe need this, but maybe not all the time. So I don't know if you have any experience on that as well.
Yeah, I think like we, and I'll say maybe as Inspire, but also as a group in the hum, for example, reflection always comes with, okay, what are we going to do about it? It's not just navel gazing, right? It's not just let's talk about it endlessly. It's like, okay, what are we going to try to change this? If it's something that we want to change, what are we going to try? What are we going to test? There's always a little experiment. It doesn't need to be huge. It could be this thing, right, that I was saying, I'm sensing something. I'm going to test this pod idea. Who wants to join, right? It could be just a small thing that then we can keep reflecting on and see if it works or not, if it sticks or not. But I think it's the focus towards let's do something about it, and not just the endless washing machine. I like that analogy. But yeah, I'm up for our next conversation. So yeah. And also please send me your research, because it sounds super interesting. I want to read it.
I will. Thank you so
Great.
much. And that's it. Here.
Thank you.
I hope you've learned loads through this conversation with Natty. For me, it's been really very rich, this great reminder about the usefulness of the implementation of insights, of whatever ends up happening with the research, how you bring it, how does it feed into the network, community, or collective again. And for me, I think that when I realized, I had this moment talking to her that, she said it a few times through the interview, that you activate the collective intelligence, which sounds very nice, but what it entails is that, you're letting go of control. And I find that fascinating every time I experience it, but it's so challenging. And I think that I sometimes catch myself not taking that element into account, which is the nature of networks. They are emergent systems. And so you give it back to the network, of course, with good proposals and ideas, and then you see, okay, what happens with that? And I think that's so powerful. That's when really something, if it sticks through that process of letting go of control, then it really does. Right. And I've been thinking about experiments, especially those more related to fostering relationships that really didn't stick. I think we've had better success with other experiments that are related to the hard part of organizing, structure, and things like that. But so I take this with me, and I'm starting to wonder how I will implement this. More on all of this on more episodes of Affectively.